Badenfeld, Germany, April 1945. The war is dying, but mercy has already died. Captain Samuel Rourke moves through the ruins when he hears a sound no soldier mistakes. A crowd preparing to kill. In the village square, a nurse is tied to a post, mud-streaked, trembling. A hand-painted sign above her head, Traitor. 30 villagers close in, fueled by grief sharpened into vengeance. Rourke freezes, knowing one wrong step could ignite them. He wasn't sent here to intervene. But when the nurse lifts her eyes broken, silent, still pleading to live, Rourke understands he has seconds to choose: walk away, or stop a lynching. In the final weeks of World War II, Germany wasn't collapsing, it was unraveling. Front lines blurred into rumors, officers vanished into the smoke, and villages like Badenfeld tried to govern themselves with fear instead of law. Civilians carried wounds deeper than the ruins around them. Betrayal became a currency, suspicion a survival skill, and justice whatever a crowd could enforce before sunrise. In this chaos, the difference between guilt and rumor shrank to the width of a rope. Captain Samuel Rourke had seen war's brutality, but nothing prepared him for what waited in that square, because this wasn't a battlefield. It was a reckoning. Rourke knew the Allied mission was simple on paper: secure ground, disarm soldiers, restore order. But order meant nothing in places where grief demanded someone to blame. And the woman tied to that post wasn't a soldier, a spy, or a threat. She was a nurse who chose compassion in a world that no longer valued it. Her fate was moments from being sealed by her own people. Before we continue, understand this: stories like this rarely make the history books, not because they're small, but because they're uncomfortable. If you want more forgotten truths like these, subscribe, because today's story cuts deeper than most. Rhineland, April 1945. War had stripped the land down to bone and smoke, but nothing felt as raw as the square Lieutenant Marcus Hale stepped into. The village looked carved out by fire-ashen walls, collapsed roofs, windows punched open like hollow eyes. His boots cracked glass that once framed a family's morning light. He felt the air tremble with something darker than ruin. Then he saw her, a woman bound to a wooden post, her nurse's coat torn, mud crusted across her skin. Above her, a hand-painted sign screamed a single judgment: Veteran, Traitor. And the crowd around her breathed like a single, simmering animal. 30 villagers, hollowed by hunger and grief, encircled her like a jury with no court. Their faces were ash gray, carved by months of surviving through bitterness, fear, and whatever passed for justice now. A boy kicked gravel toward her bound feet, imitating the adults he didn't understand. Someone spat. Someone muttered. Someone whispered prayers that felt more like curses. Hale felt the shift immediately, the dangerous stillness of a mob convinced it was righteous. His orders were simple: secure roads, check checkpoints, move east. Yet a single, sharp cry had pulled him here. A cry sliced short. A cry a soldier could not ignore. He lifted a hand toward his corporal. Hold position. No rifles raised. Hale stepped forward alone, cutting through the tension like a blade scraping stone. The crowd parted reluctantly, eyes narrowing at the British uniform advancing toward their fury. At the front stood an old man in a patched coat, gesturing at the woman as if offering evidence. She helped your soldiers, he barked. Water, bandages, comfort while our sons died. Hale studied the nurse's bruised face, the raw rope cuts carving her wrists. When her eyes lifted to him, they held no plea, only a bone-deep exhaustion shaped by impossible choices. What is her name? Hale asked. Silence cracked through the square. The old man blinked. A one-armed veteran stepped forward, voice sharp as broken metal. Her name: she betrayed us. That is enough. Hale shook his head. If you mean to execute someone, you should at least know who she is. Murmurs rippled. Anger faltered. Doubt seeped in. Hale pressed on, his German tense but steady. Show me the charges, the orders, the court decision. Anything proving this isn't simply vengeance. The veteran's jaw clenched. She chose the enemy over her people, Hale answered. Or maybe she simply chose to save lives. Then Hale saw him, a young man in an expensive coat, to clean for war's ruins. He stood 3 rows back, face carved in cold calculation, the sort of man who incited violence without dirtying his own hands, a manipulator thriving in chaos. When he stepped forward, the crowd leaned reflexively, like puppets recognizing their string holder. Lieutenant, he said smoothly, your presence complicates our justice. This woman disobeyed evacuation orders. She aided your soldiers. These facts condemn her. Hale met his gaze. Facts require proof, A microsecond flicker betrayed something: fear, maybe, power, slipping, and Hale seized on it. You speak of justice, Hale continued, yet you hide behind a mob. The crowd shifted, uncertain now, momentum stumbling. The ringleader lifted his chin. You cannot police every street, every moment. When you leave, we will finish what we started. Hale stepped closer, mud splattered on his trousers, eyes worn by too many dead. You're right, I am one man. But I am the man with the authority here. Touch her again, and you'll learn what one man can do when the law matters more than anger. The square froze, breath held between fear and defiance. Hale turned to the nurse. Her breaths were thin, her pride thinner, but her eyes met his with a quiet acceptance. Not hope, simply readiness for whatever came next. I'm cutting the rope, he murmured. The knife slid clean through the cheap hemp. The woman folded forward instantly, her strength spent. Hale caught her, arm steady around a body that felt frighteningly light, as if war had hollowed her out. Behind him, the crowd's fury sputtered into silence. No cheers, no resistance. Just a wounded village realizing its vengeance had been interrupted and perhaps exposed. The ambulance arrived in a growl of gears. Hale transferred her gently to the medics, ordering protective custody and no visitors without clearance. When she was driven away, he returned to the post. The sign still hung there, a crude declaration of guilt. He gripped it, ripping it free. Wood splintered. Nails screamed. He dropped it face down in the mud. His corporal approached. Sir. What now? Hale stared at the empty post, its cruel purpose lingering in the cold air. Now, he said quietly, we take responsibility. And for the first time, Hale understood that saving one life could reshape a man forever. The field hospital tent hummed with the weary rhythm of war-murmured orders, clinking instruments, the steady rasp of injured soldiers clinging to life. Lieutenant Hale sat beside the nurse he had cut from the post, her breathing shallow but steady now. The medic had patched her wounds with clinical precision, mapping each bruise and fracture like evidence of a crime no one wanted to name. When she stirred, her eyes opened slowly, processing the ceiling canvas, the foreline, and finally him. She didn't flinch. She didn't thank him. She simply whispered, Wasser, as if asking for permission to need something. Hale held the canteen to her lips. She sipped cautiously, like someone who had learned mercy could vanish without warning. Your name? He asked softly. She hesitated, as if the word itself might be used against her. Leona Weiss, she said finally. Nurse. Sector West. I was. She swallowed hard. Now I am only what they called me. Hale shook his head. Not anymore. When he asked what happened, her story came in fragments: collapsed front lines, abandoned hospitals, boys dying in beds too small for their fear. She described boiling bandages, rationing morphine, watching the rules of medicine crumble under survival. Then she told him about the British patrol. Lost, exhausted, one soldier bleeding badly, shrapnel buried deep. She treated him because that was what she knew stopped the bleeding, closed the wound, saved the life. She offered neither loyalty nor betrayal, only compassion. They offered to take me with them, Leona said. I stayed. Someone had to. But someone in the village had seen her. Someone eager to find traitors when real answers were too painful to face. They dragged me out, she whispered. Told me mercy was treason. Hale felt something in him harden, a new weight settling in his chest. When Hale returned to headquarters, Major Harris waited with a report in hand and disappointment written across his face. You exceeded your orders, the major said flatly. You were assigned checkpoint duty, not village redemption. Hale held his ground. I prevented a murder. You interfered with German justice, Harris countered. Their village, their traitor. Hale's jaw tightened. Not under our jurisdiction. Not while we hold authority. The major leaned back, rubbing his temples. You still believe war has rules? It doesn't, Hale answered quietly. It is people, and people deserve law, not mobs. The room felt colder. Later, outside the mess tent, Harris found Hale staring at the fractured horizon. You're not being punished, the major said grudgingly. Your actions fall within acceptable discretion. Hale nodded once. Thank you, sir. But I still don't know if you were right, Harris added. Hale exhaled. Neither do I. But I know what would have happened if I'd walked away. Harris lit a cigarette, the ember glowing like a tiny, stubborn star. We can't save everyone, I know, Hale murmured. But I could save her. Harris studied him. For how long? Hale replied. For one day. And sometimes that's everything. At the displaced persons center days later, Leona sat before a clerk who typed her testimony with slow, mechanical indifference. She answered questions about her family, her work, her capture. When the clerk handed her a stamped document, it offered no absolution, only protection. Hale watched from the doorway. She approached him, tired but steady. "Where will you go?" he asked. "West," she replied. "To whoever is left. If no one remains, then forward anyway. Life requires movement." Hale offered assistance, but she shook her head. "You gave me time. The rest is my burden." Her words felt heavier than her wounds. Before leaving the village, Hale returned to the square at dawn. Pale light washed over the ruins, revealing the post standing like a scar in the earth. Someone had tried burning it, but it remained charred, stubborn, a monument to what nearly happened. The sign he had torn down lay half buried in mud, letters smudged into meaningless streaks. He turned it over once, studying the accusation that had almost cost a woman her life. Then he let it fall. Some symbols deserved to rot. Some memories deserved to remain. Most lived in the impossible space between. As Hale walked away, he realized the war had taught him more than strategy and survival. It had revealed the fragile threads holding humanity together. Lines between guilt and innocence had blurred, but one truth remained. Someone must always stand between the rope and the victim. Someone must question the certainty of a crowd. Someone must choose law over fury, compassion over convenience. Hale wasn't sure if he had done the right thing, but he knew he had done the necessary one. And in a world unraveling faster than anyone could mend it, necessity sometimes was the closest thing to justice. The roads leading out of Badenfeld twisted through forests that had once been green, but were now a graveyard of broken trunks and burned soil. Lieutenant Hale traveled with a 2-jeep patrol, moving toward a sector rumored to hold pockets of retreating enemy soldiers. Yet his thoughts remained trapped in the village he'd left behind. Every ruined house looked like Leona's prison. Every silent yard echoed with the mob's breath. The war was winding down, but violence had become a habit people weren't ready to abandon. Hale sensed something dangerous growing in the cracks of collapsing nations, chaos disguised as justice. When they reached the forward checkpoint, a corporal handed Hale a stack of new directives. The papers smelled of fresh ink, urgency, and uncertainty. A lied command wanted officers to intervene in civilian reprisals where possible. A phrase so vague it might as well have been a shrug. Hale read it twice, frustrated by the ambiguity. "They write orders like they're afraid of choosing sides," he muttered. The corporal glanced at him. "Maybe they are, sir." Hale folded the papers. Rules meant nothing if they didn't protect the vulnerable. Badenfeld had proved that, and it wouldn't be the last village caught in Fury's grip. News of the incident reached the surrounding sector faster than Hale expected. Soldiers approached him with whispered versions of what they'd heard a British lieutenant cutting down a German woman accused of treason. Some praised him, some questioned his judgment. One sergeant muttered, "You can't save everyone. Sometimes you just inherit their enemies." Hale ignored the comment, but it lodged under his ribs like a splinter. He hadn't saved Leona for gratitude or approval. He saved her because someone had to, but the truth was unavoidable. Every life you protect becomes a burden you carry. Long after the danger ends, that evening, Hale wrote in his small, dirt-smudged journal, trying to untangle the knot forming tighter inside him. The words flowed unevenly, shaped by exhaustion and something heavier. He wrote about Leona's quiet courage, about the boy who threw gravel at her feet, about the man in the fancy coat who had manipulated the crowd. He wrote about the way she didn't beg, how she didn't collapse until the rope was gone, how she carried dignity like a fragile flame in a storm. "If war teaches anything," he wrote, "it's that mercy is the first casualty and the last victory worth fighting for." The next morning brought a new assignment. He escorted a convoy of displaced civilians moving toward a temporary camp. Among the refugees were widows dragging carts of memories, children clinging to rags like anchors, old men who had outlived sons they once hoped to bury with honor. Hale walked among them, offering directions, water, reassurance. A girl of maybe 10 tugged his sleeve, pointing to a broken wagon. "Our wheel is gone," she said. Her mother apologized nervously, expecting dismissal. Instead, Hale knelt and helped repair the axle with a borrowed tool. The mother whispered, "Why help us? We are Germans," Hale simply replied, "Your people." As the convoy moved, Hale spotted a figure walking alone along a parallel road, thin, steady, carrying a bag that looked far too light. It was Leona. She hadn't noticed him. Her gaze was fixed ahead, each step deliberate, as if movement itself kept her upright. Hale approached quietly. "You should stay with the convoy," he said. She didn't startle. She simply looked at him the way she had in the square with clarity, not fear. I cannot ask for more. Protection, she replied. If they see you with me, they will ask the same questions again. Better to walk alone than endanger others. He walked beside her anyway, at least for a while. The road stretched like an unfinished sentence. Do you regret helping those soldiers? He asked. She shook her head. A life saved is never a regret. Only the price afterward. Hale nodded, understanding more than he wished to. You didn't betray your people, Leona. Her smile was small, tired, perhaps. But grief makes traitors out of anyone who survived. They needed someone to blame. I was convenient. Hale clenched his fists. The war had made victims of everyone, but it seemed determined to punish the innocent far more than the cruel. When they reached a crossing point, she stopped. This is where I go west, she said. Hale wanted to argue, to insist she stay with the convoy or accept escort. But she lifted a hand before he could speak. You did enough, more than anyone else would have risked. Let me walk my own road now. He hesitated, then handed her a folded paper, her provisional pass stamped with Allied authority. At least take this, he said. She accepted it gently, as if touching something too fragile. Then thank you, she whispered, for giving me back the days I might have lost. Hale watched her become a small figure on the road, then a shadow, then nothing at all. Yet her absence weighed more than her presence ever had. Returning to the convoy, he felt a strange tension inside him, not regret, not satisfaction, but a sense that something unfinished had woven itself into his story. The road ahead was lined with towns just like Badenfeld, each holding another reckoning waiting to unfold. And Hale knew he would face them differently now, not because he sought heroism, but because he had learned the cost of looking away. In war's fading twilight, choosing compassion felt like the only rebellion left. The camp where the convoy finally settled was a stretch of muddy ground fenced with wire, and hope in equal measure. Tents flapped like weary lungs under the wind, and the smell of boiled potatoes drifted with the dust. Lieutenant Hale supervised the registration lines, watching faces blur into one another. Hunger, grief, shock, every expression carried the same hollow outline. Yet his eyes kept drifting toward the western road, where Leona had disappeared hours earlier. He told himself she was safe, told himself she was strong, but the part of him shaped by war knew that safety was a rumor, not a guarantee. That night, Hale sat near a small fire built from scrap wood. Soldiers ate quietly, their food clanking in tin bowls, their minds miles away. A sergeant approached with a folded map. Sir, there's trouble to villages over, he said. Locals rounding up suspected collaborators. Again. Command wants a small team to check it out. Hale felt a chill, not from the cold, but from recognition. Violence was becoming contagious. Villages had discovered how easy it was to turn grief into punishment. Prepare the jeep, Hale said. We leave at dawn. The sergeant nodded, relieved to hear certainty in his voice. The morning fog clung to the trees when Hale and two soldiers reached the village of Rotfeld. It was smaller than Badenfeld, poorer, roof sagging like broken ribs. But the tension in the air was identical. People whispered in corners, avoiding eye contact. A young boy pointed them toward the old barn. They took them there, he said. 3 women. Hale felt his stomach tighten. He pushed open the barn doors, and shafts of sunlight revealed a scene that froze him. A group of villagers circling 3 terrified women bound near the hayloft ladder. A man with soot-blackened hands addressed the crowd as if preaching a sermon of fury. Hale stepped forward, voice firm but calm. Stand down. This barn is now under Allied jurisdiction. The soot-handed man turned, eyes burning with conviction. You have no right, he snapped. These women betrayed us, fed soldiers, gave shelter, spoke to officers. They deserve judgment. Hale scanned the circle, faces full of bruised pride and weaponized grief. And who decides that? Hale asked. You, your fear, your anger. The man's lip curled. Someone must. Hale took a slow breath, remembering Leona tied to the post. Then do it properly, he said, with evidence, with process, with humanity. Otherwise you're not seeking justice, you're chasing revenge. The crowd faltered. Some exchanged uncertain glances, others tightened their grip on ropes and sticks, unwilling to surrender the righteousness they believed they held. One woman in the crowd pointed a shaking finger at the accused. My husband died in the shelling. They helped the officers who ordered it. Hale shook his head. Helping the wounded is not a crime. It's survival. It's mercy. And mercy is the last thing this country needs to lose. His voice carried through the barn, steady as a hammer striking iron. You are hurt, you want answers, but killing them will not bring back anyone. It will only destroy what's left of you. A man lunged forward, rope in hand. Hale moved quickly, grabbing the rope mid-swing. The man stumbled, startled, as Hale's soldiers took position behind him, rifles lowered but ready. The barn fell silent except for the sound of frightened breathing. Hale addressed them again, softer this time. You've lost too much already. Don't lose yourselves. Don't become the thing you blame. Slowly, shame crept into their expressions. One by one, villagers stepped back. The rope dropped to the floor. Hale approached the bound women, cutting their restraints carefully. They collapsed into each other's arms, shaking, whispering prayers. Hale felt the barn exhale outside. An old man approached Hale. Deep lines carved his face, but his eyes held something gentler than the others. "Lieutenant," he whispered, "we did not know what to do. We only knew we were angry." Hale nodded. "Anger is natural, but anger is not a compass." The old man lowered his gaze. "You saved them." Hale shook his head. "No, you did when you stepped back." The old man placed a trembling hand on Hale's arm. "War has made children of us all," he murmured, "and children reach for fire when they don't understand the dark." Hale had no reply. The truth was too heavy. After escorting the 3 women to safety, Hale and his men returned to the road. The landscape rolled past fields charred black, houses open to the sky, fences broken by tanks. War had rearranged everything, including the meaning of right and wrong. Hale felt the weight of his choices settling deeper, merging with a strange new certainty. He could not fix the world, could not stop every rope from rising, could not silence every furious crowd. But he could stand in front of one rope. He could confront one crowd. He could save one life at a time, even if mercy felt like a battle fought alone. As they neared the camp, a familiar silhouette appeared on the horizon. A figure walking slowly, carrying a small bag. Leona. Hale blinked, unsure if exhaustion was playing tricks. But as they got closer, he saw her unmistakably. She looked tired, but her posture remained unbroken. He stopped the jeep and stepped out. "You're back," he said, breath catching with relief he refused to show. She nodded. "I walked far, but everywhere feels the same. Fear. Suspicion. I thought perhaps the camp would be safer for now." Hale gestured toward the jeep. "Then come with us." She hesitated, then climbed in, settling quietly. In that moment, with the camp ahead and the sunrise behind them, Hale understood something he hadn't before. Saving her was not a single moment in the square. It was every moment afterward, every choice to stand, to speak, to guide, to resist the tide of cruelty that threatened to drown the fragile remnants of humanity. The road stretched forward, uncertain, but Hale no longer felt alone in the fight. There were still people worth protecting. There were still lines worth drawing, and mercy, he realized, was not weakness. It was the only weapon left that could keep the world from tearing itself apart. The camp changed after Leona returned. Not suddenly, not magically, but in small, human ways. She offered to help in the infirmary, her hands moving with a quiet confidence that impressed even the British medics. She dressed wounds without asking which side they'd fought on. She calmed crying children with simple games and stories about rivers and forests that still existed somewhere beyond the ruins. Some refugees recognized her from Badenfeld and looked at her with suspicion. Others avoided her entirely. But gradually, as days passed and no rope appeared, a few began to nod in passing. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't hatred either. Hale watched from a distance at first. He saw how she checked each patient's pulse twice, how she refilled water buckets before anyone asked, how she stayed after dark, making sure no one slipped between life and death unnoticed. One evening, as she stepped out of the infirmary, he approached. "You don't have to work this hard," he said. She shrugged, a faint smile touching her lips. "If I stop," she replied, "then the only thing they will remember about me is that sign." Hale understood. People like them didn't just survive war, they negotiated with its memory every day. News of the larger world filtered in through radios and scattered newspapers. The war in Europe was nearly over. Leaders argued about borders and trials. Words like reconstruction, tribunal, and reparations floated through the air like distant thunder. But inside the camp, the language was simpler: food, water, shelter, safety. Hale received a notice his unit would likely be reassigned within weeks. The idea of leaving felt strangely heavier than it should. He had spent years longing for the war to end. Now the thought of walking away from people like Leona made the idea of peace feel complicated. almost guilty. One night, unable to sleep, Hale sat outside the camp fence, journal in his lap. The stars above looked indifferent, sharp pinpricks over a bruised world. He wrote about Badenfeld, about Rotfeld, about every moment he chose to stand between rage and its target. He tried to explain it to himself. War doesn't end when the guns go quiet, he scribbled. It ends when people decide to stop needing someone to hurt. He paused, then added, maybe that's why mercy is so dangerous. It leaves no one to blame. And without blame, we must face our own reflections. He didn't hear Leona approach until she was beside him. You write often, she said softly. He closed the journal halfway, not hiding it, but not offering it either. It helps me remember what I'm afraid to forget, he answered. She nodded, understanding. I used to write lists, she said. Names of patients, temperatures, symptoms. It felt like control. She sat beside him on the rough log. For a while, they simply watched the sky. Do you think they will ever forget? She asked. The people in Badenfeld. Hale exhaled slowly. Forget? No. But perhaps one day they'll remember differently. A transfer order came 2 weeks later. Hale's unit would move east to support new administrative zones. He read the paper twice, then folded it into his pocket like a sentence he wasn't ready to accept. That afternoon, he found Leona in the infirmary, stacking bandages. They're moving us, he said. Soon, she stilled, then resumed her task. Of course, she replied. War always pulls people away before they are ready. He hesitated. There will be a civilian transport heading west in 3 days. It can take you to a larger city. From there, perhaps a new country. Her hands paused again. And if they ask who vouches for me, she said quietly. Hale placed a folded document on the table, an official statement bearing his signature and the stamp of Allied command. It described her actions as a medical professional, her presence in the hospital, the events of the square. It did not mention the sign. It did not mention the word traitor. Then you give them this, he said. She touched the paper as if it might vanish. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. Hale smiled faintly. I know. That's why I did. She laughed softly, a sound edged with sadness. You are a strange soldier, Lieutenant, he replied. I think the war made me stranger. On the morning of her departure, the transport trucks rumbled at the camp gate, engines coughing smoke. Refugees climbed aboard with bundles of belongings and fragile hopes. Leona stood near the back, bag over her shoulder, document tucked safely beneath her coat. Hale approached, unsure what final words could carry the weight of everything unsaid. If anyone asks, he said lightly, tell them you once argued with a very stubborn British officer and won. She shook her head. No, I will tell them a stubborn officer once refused to let a village decide what my life was worth. Her eyes softened. Thank you, Marcus. As the truck rolled away, Hale raised a hand. Leona didn't wave back grandly, didn't call out. She simply held his gaze until distance turned him into a blur. Then she faced forward, toward whatever waited beyond ruined borders and broken roads. Hale watched until the last truck vanished. The camp felt quieter without her, though the noise hadn't changed. He knew their paths would likely never cross again. Yet he also knew this. Somewhere in the years ahead, in some hospital or small house in a safer country, a woman named Leona Weiss would treat a child's fever or an old man's failing heart, and war would lose one more battle. That evening, Harris found Hale again, this time by the fence. You did good work here, the major admitted reluctantly. Hale shrugged. I only cut a rope. Harris shook his head. No, you did something they'll probably never mention in any report. You reminded people we're meant to be better than what this war made us. Hale stared at the darkening horizon. Will it matter? He asked. Harris was quiet for a long moment. It mattered to her. Hale nodded. Slowly. Sometimes that was enough. Not for history, not for medals, but for the small, stubborn part of a man that refused to surrender his humanity. Years later, when the uniforms were gone and the world pretended to be repaired, Marcus Hale would look at his own reflection and know there had been a time when everything could have tilted the other way, when it would have been easier to look away, follow orders, let the crowd do what crowds do. Instead, he chose to step forward, to question, to say, not this, not today. Maybe history would never remember the village, the post, or the sign, but he would. And somewhere, far from the square where it started, a life continued because one man refused to agree that mercy was treason. If this story stirred something in you, then don't let it fade, because somewhere in every war, every conflict, every lifetime, there is always a rope, always a crowd, Always one human being waiting for anyone to say, "Not this, not today." If you believe mercy is strength, if you believe courage isn't just on battlefields, if you believe one choice can change a life, then like this video, share it, and subscribe, because every week, we bring you the stories history forgot, but humanity still needs to remember.